Hi, and welcome back to the MilVet Podcast. I'm your host, Brendan Aronson, and today I'm joined by my co-host, Tim Shaw, for our 100th podcast episode. We think it's particularly fitting that Tim and I are celebrating what might be the least noteworthy human accomplishment in history by recording this 100th episode by interviewing a man who has achieved one of the most noteworthy accomplishments in human history as the 500th person ever launched into space. And today we're talking with Chris Cassidy. Chris is a former Navy SEAL, and if that wasn't enough, he's also an astronaut. Today, Chris is the president and the CEO of the Medal of Honor Museum. Before we dive in, would love to invite you to like, subscribe, share the podcast with a friend. Chris, thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Always great to be with the military community, so glad to be with you guys today.
Yes, sir. The first question I wanted to ask you, Chris, I have this memory of being in Iraq as the sun was coming up. And I was smoking a cigarette at the very beginning of the day. And this memory of just being in this place of unbelievable historical significance and feeling this immense sense of gratitude and connection to the rest of the human race as just a small piece in this great story that we've woven. But I got to ask you, what was the experience like looking at the Earth from outer space?
Oh, man, there's nothing like it. And you set a stage really well. You know, it takes those unique moments where you're by yourself or you're with someone special in your life and something's happening and you realize, hey, this is one of those moments that's going to be locked in my brain as a memory forever. And viewing the Earth from space is exactly one of those. Particularly there's a couple moments where I remember it very vividly. One was my first time seeing it. Right after launch on the shuttle, my very first mission, and looking out the window, and we were over the Straits of Gibraltar. My job at the time was to take pictures of the external fuel tank right as the shuttle separated from it. And I was doing that. And then over the top of the camera, my eye got distracted with the Straits of Gibraltar. And we were 30 minutes into the mission. And I remember thinking, wow, it's normally a lot longer than 30 minutes to fly from Florida to Spain. And the world was going by 5 miles a second. You see this perspective of just kind of no borders, blue, swirly oceans, and brown and green, different colors of the land, and white clouds and mountaintops. And it just looks like this amazing place that's home for everybody. And not to get too geeky, but I remember thinking, wow, that's a spaceship for all of humankind. I'm on a spaceship for 7 people at the time, the shuttle, and below us is a spaceship for whatever 7 billion people or whatever the number is, and it just kind of puts everything in perspective. And like you said, makes you feel just like this little small piece of something bigger and grander. The other moment that I remember very vividly was my first time doing a spacewalk. So instead of being inside the confines of a ship, now you're outside, and it's just you're looking at Earth go between your toes, and that's a little bit scarier, but still cool.
I mean, it's amazing. Chris, I want to ask you a little bit about your background and where you've kind of come from. Can you tell us a little bit about where you grew up and how that may have influenced some of the later parts of your life? You've obviously achieved a great deal, but just kind of curious where you came from and what kind of values were instilled in you as a young man.
Yeah, I grew up in a small town in Maine, and nothing really different about my background than most people. You know, I have one younger brother. He's 3 years younger. We both love sports, so we always seem to have a ball of some kind in our hand, whatever season it was, usually football or basketball or baseball or just anything that bounced. We would figure out something fun to do with it. And that's how I remember growing up. And then no real military connection for me. And it wasn't until I was trying to figure out how to pay for college. I knew I wanted to go to college, and helping my parents cover that I know was going to be an important aspect of it. And that's how I stumbled into military as an option to pay for school. And I read about ROTC, but when I saw a picture of the Naval Academy on a glossy book, you know, with nice, cool granite buildings and men and women marching in uniform and sailboats in the back, you know, the perfect Annapolis photo. I was like, wow, that seems pretty cool. And because we like sports, we always watch the Army Navy football game, and so I kind of put it in my head like, oh, those are the people where they're from that they play the Army Navy game, and I thought that would be really neat to get to go to an Army Navy game dressed up as one of those guys. And in my naive brain, I didn't have this grand vision of serving the country or anything. It was just like, okay, it's a really cool place. It's free to go. And I did read you have to be in the military upon graduation. But I was like, oh, that'd be cool. And I didn't even know that you could do different stuff in the military or the Navy, submarine, surface ships, SEALs, Marine Corps, all these different options. I had no clue. I just go be in the Navy. And that set me off on a path. There's another follow-on story to that of how I got there, and which is kind of fundamental to who I am as a person. I'll share that with you if you want. Yeah.
I'd love to hear it.
Yeah. So, in that same guidance counselor's office where I saw the picture of the school, and I read that you had to apply to your congressman's office to get a nomination. And so I sent off the paperwork that was required for the congressman and was invited for an interview. I did the interview and it all went well. And the staff person, who was in my mind a position of authority, she was probably, now knowing what I know about congressional staffers, she was probably like 26. And she said, yeah, good job. We'll take care. We'll send all the stuff for you. And so this is the fall of my senior year. And so I asked again, and you don't anything else from me? Nope. We got it. We're all squared away. So fast forward to the spring of my senior year, everybody's finding out about if you're into schools or not. And I was getting this from other schools, but nothing from Navy. And finally I call the admissions office in Annapolis, and wonderfully nice person answers the phone, and I explained to her my situation, and she said, sure, I can help. I can look into it. Tell me your name again. I tell her. She's rummaging through files on the side of the phone. Can you spell your name? More files on the side of the phone. What's your social security number? More files. I'm sorry, you are not in our system. We don't have anything on you. It turns out I missed a key piece of information that both you guys know. You got to apply to the school and to the congressman's office. It's like two parallel things. And bad on me, I didn't really understand it. And so I effectively hadn't applied to Navy where I really wanted to go, and it was free, and I all those things. But here's where it gets interesting. My best friend and I had planned to join his father on a business trip to Washington, D.C. from Maine. It's like an 8-hour drive. And the next week, which was our spring vacation from school. So I did that and just took the only deviation to the plan. It took a half a day and drove over from DC to Annapolis, like 30-minute drive, and went to the admissions office, walked in. I recognized the lady's voice, and she recognized my story. And she said, oh, you're the guy from Maine. Yeah. Captain Malillo, Marine Corps captain. He's the New England region representative for admissions, and he's in his office right now, third door on the right. Go down there. He'll help you out. So I walked down the hall, never having met an active duty Marine before, and I turned the corner, and there is the poster child United States Marine. Uniform squared away, shoes you see reflection in, haircut, square jaw, big guns, the whole 9 yards. And I'm like, oh my God, is this a human? I don't know. I wanted to like poke him. But I realized, okay, this is the person I got to tell my story to if I want to go here. And so I did. Total time on target in his office, maybe 5 or 6 minutes tops. And he nodded his head, wasn't very communicative. And that was it. At the end, he goes, okay, I understand. I'll get back to you. And so I go back to my hometown. And I remember thinking, well, at least I tried. I gave it my best shot. I did everything I could. So I can sleep soundly at night, but I'm not going to the Naval Academy. I pretty much know that. I got to come up with plan B. A couple days later, and this is where it gets interesting, and so bear with me on the length of this story, but a couple days later, he calls me at school. I get a page to the main office for a phone call, and it's him. He's like, hey, Cassidy, it's Captain Malillo from the Naval Academy. I've got good news. I can get you into the Naval Academy prep school, but I need an answer right here on the phone if you're in or not. What do you say? And I didn't know what the prep school was. I didn't know how to spell the word NAPS, Naval Academy Prep School. I didn't know where it was, any time commitment, none of that. But I just kind of felt, even as a young kid, I was like, okay, if I want to go there, this is the opportunity. Here's a door that's a little bit open. What side of this door do you want to be on when it shuts? And so I said, yes, sir. Thank you. I'm honored to go. It turns out, and the reason I share this story in so much detail, if it wasn't for that gift, the gift of an opportunity of this guy, a Marine who I didn't know, he didn't owe me anything. He was just doing his job. I was just some knucklehead 17, 18-year-old from Maine that didn't do the process right. Everybody else did the process right. But if it wasn't for the gift from him, I probably wouldn't be talking to you guys today. Because of him, I went to the prep school. If you maintain certain grades, you automatically get admitted to the Annapolis. While I was at Navy, I met and saw my first Navy SEAL person who was a guy on staff there. As you know, there's many mentors for all the different communities. He inspired myself and my classmates who were interested in SEALs, and I ended up in the SEAL teams. While I was in the SEAL teams, I met Bill Shepard, who was the first Navy SEAL to become an astronaut. And he, again, inspired me, motivated me, mentored me through the process to apply. And I found myself selected in 2004 to be an astronaut. And then several space flights later, wrapped up my military career and found and stumbled into a really cool position at which I'm now in at the Medal of Honor Museum. All of that. And if I think back and I play my whole life back, every bit of those steps are because somebody believed in me for whatever reason and gave me an opportunity, and it was Captain Malillo. So it's really important to me now, especially where I'm in a position where I could be Captain Malillo for others, and all of us can. And you never know what day that might be. You could be going to the grocery store and you meet some high school kid that you become a motivating person in their life, and off you go. So I really am so thankful for that opportunity.
For sure. Um, Chris, you're never going to believe this. I actually have a very similar story. I'm not going to bore people with the whole story, but I was like the last dude admitted to my class at the academy. I almost
Wow.
suffered. Yeah, I almost suffered a fate worse than just whatever. I was almost a West Pointer. I was like
Oh,
2 days away, and I got a call from Lieutenant Kristen Kachansky, who said the same thing to me in the afternoon. She was like, "It's 1 p.m. Give me an answer by 4 if you're in or you're out." you know.
yeah.
But yeah,
And
this whole
that moment in your life changed everything. And there you are. I mean, it's just unbelievable, those little inflection points.
for
I
sure.
see how the Naval Academy operates these days. I need an answer right now, yes or no.
It's a good sales tactic, Tim. You know that.
Right. It's the
You're in or
close.
you're out. That's right. It's the close. Chris, I want to ask a little bit. Okay, so you go to the academy. You mentioned a few mentors who were responsible for showing you a little bit about the SEAL teams and what they kind of stand for. Can you tell me a little bit about your experience as a SEAL before you moved over into the astronaut program? I know you did a couple of deployments. I would imagine that when you got into the SEAL teams, it was during a period of peace in the 90s, and that changed very quickly on 9/11. And I'm just wondering if you can share a little bit about what your journey over the course of that time was like.
Yeah, absolutely. So graduated from Navy 93. And the next year was basically SEAL training, buds and jump school, and a few other follow-on schools that young aspiring SEALs do. And then I showed up to my first team, which was SDV team, SEAL Delivery Vehicle Team 2 in Little Creek, Virginia, Norfolk area. Uh, and I loved that mission. We drove mini submarines. They're about 20 feet long, flooded submersible. Not really a submarine where you're dry on the inside. It's a submersible where the water's around you and you wear scuba gear as you drive it. And we launched from full-size submarines. It was the coolest mission ever, especially for a young officer, because on land, as you guys know, especially nowadays with omnipresent communication, you're always tied by some electronic leash back to the headquarters. But the physics of water prevents you from being able to call anybody when you on an 8-hour dive. So a lot of responsibility in decision making and risk analysis and go no go criteria as you move through an underwater mission fell on a very junior guy, myself and my E5 dive buddy. which I just loved. I loved the problem solving underwater and that sense of understanding commander's intent and the commander being comfortable with launching you guys. So I love that. I did that for 4 years, and 94 to 98, and then off I went to graduate school for a couple of years, and then I finished graduate school in 2000, training up with SEAL Team 3, which was my next command, where I was a SEAL platoon commander, and we knew we were going to deploy to the Middle East. SEAL Team 3 was kind of covered down on the Middle East region of the world. And we knew we were deploying there at Thanksgiving time of 2001. So a 18-month workup cycle. And then lo and behold, we're pretty much done with our training workup, and 9/11 happens. So I just happened to be in the SEAL platoon that was most ready to deploy to that area. And off we went. And so I had a couple deployments, 6-month deployments in that peacetime period that, as you said, doing the underwater stuff in the Mediterranean, and then 2 post 9/11 deployments to Afghanistan.
Chris, I don't know how true this is, but your Wikipedia says that you were on the ground in Afghanistan 2 weeks after 9/11.
That's probably a little, like, I left America. So if you remember 9/11, it was like 9 a.m. Eastern time out in California, where I was, my duty station. It was 6 a.m. I remember showering that morning, and my wife coming in saying, "Hey, you got to come see the TV." And so I left for work that day, knowing that we'd be packing our gear. I wasn't, and you don't know. I'm like, I don't know if we'll be home today. Turns out it took about 2 weeks to leave Coronado, and that's the 2-week part. We first went to where'd we go? Kuwait, and it's a couple days there, and then landed in Oman, a couple days there. So I was probably boots on the ground in Kandahar, Afghanistan, first week in October or something like that.
What was it like being one of the first Americans in the country?
It was really weird. Not weird. It was fascinating, because when in all of your pre-deployment training, and everything you learn as a junior officer and junior enlisted, there's always this big military infrastructure that's supporting combat operations. Here we are, a C-130 blacked out rolls into the airfield at Kandahar, and 18 SEALs spill out the back of it. And with some, I can't remember the size of the Marine body that was with us, but like a platoon or not a full company. And that was it at the airbase there for the first couple nights. And then more airplanes would come in, putting more resources into the area. But those first few weeks, we were sort of building the intel picture each night, and then developing what the plan would be for tomorrow night as we went. So it was unlike how I thought my first combat experience would be, in the sense that you brief the 06 in the talk, and then you get approval to go, and then you go execute this part of a grander plan. When I went back in 2003, that's how it was. There was more time established there. There was a tactical operations center and a joint tactical operations center and all the things. But that first probably month, it was figure something out, execute, learn what you learned on that, and then bake it into the plan, and sort of paint the intel picture as you go. And it was really, really interesting.
Chris, and Tim, by all means, like, butt in if you want to. Chris, I imagine that being in that position shortly after 9/11 must have been a really emotional experience for members of your team. I don't know if you had guys that were from like New York, New England. I know the whole country was reeling. I mean, I remember it. I was very young at the time. It was in like middle school. But I remember the feeling being back in the United States, and I can only imagine what the emotional experience must have been being downrange during that time. Can you tell us a little bit about like just what that felt like?
Yeah, I mean, everybody had an NYPD or NYFD, I guess, fire department, police department stickers and patches on their gear. And you're right. It was just this incredibly patriotic time where you felt so lucky and privileged to be on the pointy end of a thing that was trying to avenge what the morning of our country. And and we were excited. We were, I mean, the spouses and moms and dads of us on the platoon, and I imagine it was, I'm talking about our SEAL platoon, but I imagine it's a similar thing for everybody that was over there early and later. But they don't want you to be there, but it's what you're trained for. It's why you're there. It's why you go through all of the preparation and discipline to get to the point where your country says you're ready to go and represent us and keep us safe. So it's kind of this proud moment at the same time. And then for me personally, as a young junior platoon commander of SEALs, I remember thinking on the airplane ride over there, it's kind of quiet from the airplane ride into Kandahar. So everybody's in their gear, rucksack underneath your legs, quiet, vibrating around in a dark green hue that you can picture inside the back of a C-130. I remember just kind of looking down the line at everybody's face and the side of their face. And, I know them all really well, and I know who their spouses, significant others, and moms and dads are. And I had this feeling of, wow, this is a lot of responsibility. Am I really ready for this? And I remember second guessing myself, like, do I have the skills to keep these guys safe? Am I capable of making the decisions to and I was kind of playing it all in my head, not self-doubt, but just like, whoa, this is a big deal. And I realized a little bit then, but with some reflection back a little bit later, that's what's so cool about the military is, we usually rotate every couple of years to a new duty assignment. And most often you rotate into something with more responsibility and increased level of responsibility. Yeah. On you as a person and as a leader. And I realized, I wouldn't be in this spot right now if I wasn't ready. Each step of the way. I think I'd been in the Navy for, 93 to 01. So yeah, 8 years or so. And I realized that each step of the way gets you a little bit more and more ready. We suffer through all those boring leadership classes at West Point and Navy, and they are kind of boring, and I'm guilty of sleeping through them, but some of them are super interesting. But it's hard to really soak that into your own personal experience base when it's just a story of somebody else. And then you start living it as a young person in the military, and another tour, and all those experiences add on to what you learned on the book side of it, and you formulate your own leadership style. And I remember kind of coming to peace with it as on the plane ride, like, I think I am ready because of the military.
That's amazing. Chris, I want to ask you, I've had a friend of mine describe for me what it's like to be in the SEAL delivery vehicle itself. You talked a little bit about it. It's like dark, it's fully submerged. You're in a scuba mask. Sometimes your comms work, sometimes they don't. And you're basically, buttoned up super, super tight in this small space for 6-8 hours, in the cold, basically just enduring.
Yeah, you just described it. That's exactly it.
If your comms don't work, then you're just alone. Right? You know that your buddies are to your left and right, but like, it must be a very lonely and isolating type of experience. And I have zero idea of what it's like to be strapped to a space shuttle that's about to rip through the atmosphere with however many thousands and thousands of pounds of fuel behind you. You're literally strapped to a rocket. But I imagine that you've had these experiences that are very, very intense. And I'm curious if you can tell us a little bit about where does your mind go to during these intense experiences, and how do you think about preparing your mind for what you have gone through, or how do you mentally prepare for these, very high risk, high danger type situations?
Well, this kind of ties into fear and anxiety a little bit, I think, and I've thought a lot about this, and I think those emotions ratchet up the more that there are unknowns. And a good example at a very human basic level is a kindergartner who's about to go to school for the first day, scared like crazy, crying and hanging on to mom and dad's leg uh, right leading up to the door. And if you come back at lunch on day one, the kid is immersed in it and having fun and laughing, and they didn't even know they were scared 3 hours ago because all the unknowns are stripped away. But right before the door, it's an intense feeling of unknown, which makes anxiety and fear and the kid crying. Us as adults, we don't have quite the emotional outburst, but there's still those internal things like all the unknowns that can drive. So with that, I think that's why we do training. In my experience as a SEAL and as an astronaut, it's the same thing. Training, simulation after simulation. And the reason we do all that is to dial down on all the unknowns as much as you can, and take away the risk balance, where you mitigate the risk that to the max extent possible, to the point where you feel like you're ready for all the unknowns out there. Now, and the truth is, you're never going to predict and train for the exact scenario that it unfolds in real life. But with a solid baseline of training and preparation, the unit, the team, the platoon, the company has a place to deviate from. Like, oh, okay, this is kind of similar to X, Y, or Z. This is how we do that. And then it makes it much easier to adapt. And so that ties back to the answer to your question, is both driving SDVs, platoons in Afghanistan, spacewalking, launching on a rocket, all I felt prepared and ready as I could be. I felt like the team of people in Mission Control in Houston, the team of people in the Operations Center and whatever combat environment, were also well trained and have our back. And so that helps a whole lot with all those kind of more hairy situations, when you feel like it's an overall really prepared organization.
Chris, I don't want to ask what lessons you learned from the Naval Academy, because I'm not sure if they actually teach anything there. All jokes aside, can you please share what you did learn from your Navy SEAL training and your combat experience that you still apply on a frequent, if not daily, weekly, monthly basis of a leader at the Medal of Honor Museum?
Yeah. The biggest thing, and this was reinforced in the day one of plebe summer. It's reinforced for me at different points in SEAL training, and then as the first 2 years you're an astronaut candidate, but basically it's intense graduate school for space operations, and all those things. I realized that you don't get through those challenging times by yourself. If you think that you're gonna make it through Hell Week all by yourself, you've lost the battle already. You have a buddy, and the two of you get together. You have a boat crew, and you as a boat crew get through it. In plebe summer, you have your squad, and every day somebody is struggling, and the squad rallies around that struggling person. And for me, in Hell Week, one day, Wednesday night of Hell Week's 5 days long. Wednesday's the middle of it, and I remember kind of staring off in the sunset as the sun's setting, and had a cold MRE in my hand, and I wasn't thinking about quitting, but I remember thinking, man, this is not really fun. This sucks, and feeling sorry for myself. And then I looked over to the guy next to me, who just kind of looked at me and said, "Are you good?" Because he could tell I was drifting off mentally. And that little bit of human contact made me realize, okay, he's just as cold and hungry and tired as I am. And he's got a smile on his face, and snapped me back to reality. And, and I may have been that guy for somebody else. I don't even know at a different point. So the biggest takeaway through all of those experiences, Tim, for me, is that units, whether it be a family or a relationship or a combat operation unit, you get through trying times together. It's easy to get through the good times, and when it's sunny and clear visibility and everything's fine. But it's those times where you need each other. And that's true here. Now I'm a leader in a civilian organization. You got surge periods of time where it's a whole lot of work. Nobody's shooting at you, but it's still stress, and you get through those together.
Chris, Thank you for that. I want to ask a little bit about during your time, the transition from the SEAL teams into the NASA program. I know you had gone to graduate school shortly before 9/11. It sounds like, I believe that was at MIT,
Mm-hmm.
and then go back for your SEAL platoon command time, and then obviously you're doing combat operations. What was it like then to transition into the NASA astronaut program? Was it something
Yeah.
that you had agreed to like before 9/11? Was it something that you felt renewed vigor for after a couple of combat deployments? Like, what was your mindset at the
Mm-hmm.
time?
Mm-hmm. I was never a kid that was dreaming about being an astronaut. I didn't have space shuttle stuck to my wall. I had Larry Bird and Dennis Johnson and Kevin McHale, the Boston Celtics, plastered all over my walls. So it wasn't the idea, the concept of becoming an astronaut didn't arrive to me until as I was in the SEAL teams doing my job, and that's, as I mentioned earlier, met Bill Shepard, and through that his guidance, I found myself selected. In fact, the second phone call that changed the direction of my life, the first one was Captain Malillo getting me into the Naval Academy. The second one was from the chief astronaut, who called at the end of the whole selection process and said, "Hey, Chris, would you be interested in coming to work here?" And that I was moving to Bahrain, to the Naval Special Warfare Unit 3 in Bahrain that summer, and that changed my orders. And I vectored as a family from Virginia instead of to Bahrain to Houston, and spent the rest of the next 18 years or so in Houston. That transition period was interesting because at that time, SEALs were a lot quieter. There was not all these books written, and generally SEALs weren't talking about what we did. It's a little different now, but that's a whole side thing. I saw a funny meme the other day that said, whatever, 5,000 men have served as SEALs since Vietnam. I think I've met 100,000 of them, which I thought was pretty funny. Anyway,
I'll make a quick joke. This is the Army joke. This is the Army joke. How do you know they're a Navy SEAL? They'll tell you.
they'll tell you, right?
It's like a
Which
Harvard
is so
grad.
true.
Same
It
thing
is
as a
so,
Harvard.
yeah, 100% so accurate and so true. Where was I? Oh, the transition. So that I got down there, and so you're learning technical stuff, and that was all not so, that wasn't bad. But the one thing that's different is it's part of your job as an astronaut to be a public figure and to go into schools and talk to communities. And so this is really early in the post 9/11 timeframe. It's 2004, so with 3 years or so. And I was getting a lot. I was there as a NASA astronaut in whatever community, but I'd get a ton of questions about Afghanistan and Navy SEAL stuff, and it was uncomfortable for me. I wasn't used to talking about it, and so that was as crazy as it sounds, that was the biggest adjustment for me, was getting comfortable speaking about my experiences in the military, and sharing my thoughts and my and those experiences. So that was a little bit hard. The other hard part was learning Russian language. My brain works in numbers. I can do math all day long, but I'm a bit of a caveman when it comes to learning languages, and that was hard. And you have to learn to speak Russian because we fly with them. The cosmonauts all take English lessons, but in general, you speak this hybrid of Russian and English together. So that was really hard for me.
That's wild.
Real quick on the Russian. How long did you stay at the space station, the ISS?
So I flew 3 different missions. The shuttle missions are all 2 weeks long, just limited in how much oxygen you can put in the tanks. But we went to the space station. So for my first mission was 2 weeks on the space station. And then my second and third missions, both of them I launched in a Russian Soyuz, which is a 3-person capsule. And my other 2 crewmates were Russian cosmonauts. And in both instances, stayed on the space station for a little over 6 months, basically 6 months. So cumulative, I've spent about a little over a year total up there.
Do you get TDY when you're up there?
You do, yeah. You're a government person, and you get put. The travel orders are actually quite interesting because it says depart home station, Houston, Texas, report to Moscow, and because you're in Russia for about a month before launch, and then it says International Space Station is your duty station. But guess what? Lodging is provided, food is provided. So what does that leave you in the government travel system? Incidentals. So you get $5 a day for incidentals. We got nothing to spend it on, but you do get $5 a day while you're on the International Space Station.
Man, the idea or the juxtaposition of you going on one of the most scientifically advanced cutting edges of human technology to be launched to the International Space Station, and then coming home and having to file a DTS report,
Yeah,
and interact with this God.
It's kind of crazy. And I always felt like we should get combat zone tax exclusion benefits. Not that we're in a combat zone, but we overfly it 16 times a day. It seems like a no-brainer that we shouldn't have to pay our tax. We get income tax waived just like you would if you're overseas. But we were never successful in getting that approved. So you got to pay all your normal taxes.
Well, I'm very sorry to hear that, Chris.
Yeah.
We'll be writing our Congress.
But it's a small price to pay. All of us are so happy and thankful to be there. We don't mind.
For sure. Chris, can you tell me a little bit about the next transition out of the NASA program and into the seat that you're in today at the National Medal of Honor Museum? What attracted you to the opportunity? And then I've got some follow-on questions about your work today.
So I, leading up to my last mission, which was most of 2020, in fact, I launched right as COVID started, and it was wonderful not to be on the planet during those first 7 months of COVID. I'll tell you, it was pretty sweet to have myself and my two crewmates were the only human beings not on the planet Earth.
Wow.
For most of the beginning of COVID. And so I knew leading into that mission that because that was my 27th year in the Navy, and I knew that I was approaching the line of demarcation where you got to retire at 30. And so I had a decision to make. Do I retire from the military but just convert over as a civil servant and become and continue doing my job as an astronaut, but now as a civil servant? Or if I'm going to off ramp from the government, now's a good time to do it. I was about 51, I think. And if I stayed for another space mission, it would be 5 or 6 or 7 years down the road. And at that point, I'd be 56, 57, 58 years old, and a little harder probably to get a new job as a 58-year-old than as a 51-year-old. So I decided before I launched on that mission, I knew that after the mission, I would kind of wrap up my NASA stuff and retire from the Navy and from NASA at the same time in early 2021 or summer of 2021. And I would do something different. I just didn't know what to do something different would be. Very natural for astronauts to explore opportunities with aerospace companies, and we know the community, we know the people. So I had a few feelers in the water for some of those opportunities. And Mike Hayes, who was my swim buddy in SEAL training, and he had retired from the Navy a few years before, and he's doing his civilian job, and he was on the board, and he still is the board of directors of the Navy Medal of Honor Museum Foundation, where I work now. And the CEO before had to step down for health reasons, so Mike knew as a board member that they were looking for a new CEO. And he called me and said, "Hey, Chris, would you be interested in checking this out?" And I was kind of like, I don't know, man. My wife and I, we were both retiring from the government. She worked for NASA also. We were thinking we were going to move to Florida, maybe Tampa, and look for employment opportunities there and kind of drive geography instead of job driving geography. And but of course, I knew about the Medal of Honor as a military guy. I didn't know that there was a project to build a museum or an institute related to it. I didn't know any of that. He said, "Just come on up to Dallas." And so I drove up from Houston to Dallas one day and met the people involved. The mayor of Arlington, Texas, is a very passionate guy, and he showed me what is going on here in the town. I met Charlotte Jones, who's the chairman of our board, and of the Dallas Cowboys, Family Jones, and I realized that there's a lot of support behind this project, because I was a little intimidated. Like, wow, you got to raise $300 million. I don't even have 300 friends, let alone 300 friends with $1 million in their pocket. So I was a little intimidated. Like, I don't know how to raise that kind of money, but I realized that there's a lot of support in DFW, a lot of support in Texas, a lot of support in our nation. It's not a pick a sides kind of political thing. It's for our military, and it's for our military heroes. Anyways, preaching to the choir to you guys on that. And so they offered me a job, and I took it. And that was in summer of 2021. So 3.5 years ago. And it's been really awesome.
I think the story you shared earlier about your time being a NASA astronaut and having to get comfortable telling your story as a NASA astronaut and as a Navy SEAL makes me feel like you're a fantastic fit for this role, because you're the ambassador for Medal of Honor recipients who had that same struggle. And so you have a understanding of the challenges of telling your story, of being a humble, professional, quiet leader, and having to do that on behalf of all the Medal of Honor recipients, and you can relate to their background. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a great point, Tim, because I realized kind of early in my first month or two on the job, I was kind of doing a little reflection, like, okay, what exactly is my job? What does this organization need of me? And we were small. We were like 15, 18 people at the time. We're a little bigger now, but and I realized, because they didn't hire me because I know how to build buildings. They didn't hire me because I'm the only person in the world that can lead 18 people on a fundraising effort. They hired me because it needed exactly what you said, Tim. Somebody to go out and spread awareness and to get people excited. And my story has been helpful in doing that as a way to share with people's stories about the Medal of Honor. And it's really one of the common things I heard Medal of Honor recipients say when I first started to get to know them is, it's harder to wear this medal than it is to earn it. And it weighs more on my neck than the little 5 ounces that it weighs on a scale. And those comments really, really resonated loudly to me. Like, I get it, and hey, I got recognized. I don't know why it was me, they say, because the 3 other dudes that were fighting the battle with me were doing exactly the same thing. I don't know how I'm the one that got picked out. And so the nature of that is something that we were excited to share those stories with the country.
Tim and I are fortunate to be able to interface with a Medal of Honor recipient named Will Swenson, who's a terrific human being. We're huge fans of his. He's very humble, extremely down to earth, servant leader. I mean, we love Will. He's just terrific. But I want to ask you, it strikes me that you have this unique vantage point into the value of symbols in our lives and in our country and in our culture. Right? You're a graduate of the Naval Academy. You're wearing the shirt today. You wore the trident on your chest for a long time as a SEAL. That has, I think for a lot of people symbolizes a modern day Spartan training of like going through this rite of passage to prove that you have the medal to make it through. And then the astronaut program, of course, is a symbol of America and our ability to overcome adversity, our ability to unite together to achieve really monumental things. And then, of course, the position that you sit in today, the Medal of Honor, is a symbol of what the individual is capable of, and the courage that is required by all service members, but it specifically exists to call out those of us who go above and beyond the call of duty. So I'm curious, Chris, I know there's a meandering intro to this question, but can you comment a little bit on the value of symbols in our lives and in our culture as a country, And then a little bit about the difficulty of wearing some of those symbols. You commented on it a little bit about how much of a toll it takes on the individual, but I'm just kind of curious to hear you opine on those two topics.
Yeah, it's a good question. Never really thought too deeply about it, but one thing comes to mind, and that is like there's mythical aura about different things, right? Like people see SEAL training on a documentary and go, "Oh my gosh, that's so only the most elite people can make it through." That's not true. They're just normal Americans who don't quit. Uh, and the SEAL instructors don't expect you to do on day one what they expect you to do on graduation day. It's a ramp up in getting your body ready and getting your mind ready but just every day the expectations are a little bit deeper, and you just have to keep stepping up and answering. Same thing with putting on a spacesuit, for instance. People see that and go, "Oh my God, I don't know if I could do it," but you can. You can do it. It's just normal people who got selected in the program who have a little bit extra training, and we have the same nerves as anybody else that would do things. So these symbols, as I'm kind of walking my thoughts through this answer, these symbols are things that represent different things, but the people behind them are just everyday normal people who are prepared for that thing based on the training and preparation you've gone through. I felt the same way about going to graduate school at MIT. Like everybody thinks, "Oh, you're super smart that you graduated from there." I was on the struggle bus, and my own daughter went there as an undergrad, and I remember as a graduate student when she was really little when I was there, and I remember walking around going, "Thank God I'm here as a graduate student, because all these undergrads look miserable." And then my own daughter goes there, and I'm like, "Oh no, she's going to be miserable." But she stepped up. She's much smarter than I am, and she made it through.
That's very cool. I had the same feeling when I was at Wharton. We used to watch the undergrads just suffering, and I was like, "Oh, God bless you guys." Are just
exactly.
I'm glad I'm not curved against you.
Glad I'm not you. Yeah,
for sure. Chris, I want to ask. We've got a couple closing questions here. Tim, I'll kick it over to you for some of your favorite rapid fire questions in a minute. But Chris, before I do, I want to ask one final question, which is, what advice would you have for young service members or recently transitioned veterans who are in the early stages of their career? You can take the question, and it's meant to be open-ended and broad, but any general advice that you would have for those of us that are early in our careers?
Well, what I love about the military, lots of things, but what that's so cool is it has a beginning, which is semi-similar for all of us, some sort of indoctrination thing with somebody yelling at you, and you do push-ups and you run around and you're tired. Whether that's Army, Navy, Coast Guard, whatever. It's some sort of beginning that's difficult, it's formative, and it strips the I out of you and builds the we into you. And then there's an ending, whether that's a retirement or whether that's a 5-year stint and you go. But the line between those two dots, the common thing, even though they're different for everybody, the common thing is it's woven with rich experiences, rich friendships, and just like unique. Back to your point, Brendan, when you were in Iraq and you're watching the sun come up in that moment, and I've had the similar thing in spaces we shared earlier. Those indelible moments that are ingrained in your head are, and they're all different, but they all are because we're in the military, and that's what I love about it. You're not going to get rich on your paycheck, but you're going to get rich with your experiences and friendships, and those friendships are the best ones you have in your whole life. I think probably the case with you too, as well as for me, the ones you went through whatever training it was together. So my advice to young people starting out is appreciate every one of those experiences, appreciate every one of those friendships. And like the day I did my last SDV dive, I didn't know it was going to be that. I just got out of the water, showered, dried my wetsuit, and went home. But by the way life works, that was my last SDV dive, and now I have to think back on that, and I didn't know, appreciate that for what it was. So my advice is the military gives you so many cool things. Soak it all in, lock it in your brain. And when you're later in life, like I am now, you can think back and tell stories, and the stories get larger and taller and bigger and faster with each passing reunion. But they're still fun to share.
Amazing. One more question before we go into rapid fire questions. What advice do you broadly have for fundraising? And we ask this because we meet a lot of military veterans who have to fundraise. Rarely $300 million, but we meet founders all the time, military veteran founders. We meet folks who are starting funds. We meet a lot of veterans who have either joined a nonprofit or have started a nonprofit. And we believe that nonprofit fundraising is the hardest. There's no promise of financial return. And we actually think that those fundraisers are typically the best because they just have to tell an even better story. And so any thoughts on fundraising broadly?
Well, I have a lot because I've learned a lot in just 3 short years, which, by the way, I think it's good to be a new person in a new organization and new learning periodically in life. Like I had been an astronaut for 18 years and was very comfortable in it. I stepped into the nonprofit role, was very uncomfortable, new learning. And I think that's very healthy to have those kind of checkpoints in life, but I digress. So the biggest things I've learned is that there are a lot of opportunities for people to give their philanthropic energy, whether that is in the form of money or time, because those are 2 things people can give, right? Money or time. And when you're asking something of somebody to support you, you're basically asking for one of those 2 things. And because, especially in the military world, there's a lot of people doing a lot of great stuff and a lot of similar overlaps nowadays too. You know, how many foundations are there that give scholarships to young kids? A lot, So how do you differentiate yourself from others? That's a whole conversation we could talk an hour about. And do there need to be that many? Could we start formulating those? But it's America, everybody's free to start their own foundation. And that's the beauty of our country. So how do you differentiate yourself? I think it boils down to trust. The person that you're asking something of needs to trust you, the person that's doing the ask. They need to be enthusiastic about the mission, which generally people are about military things. But the other thing I learned is if somebody's father died of pancreatic cancer, they may be more inclined to give all of their philanthropic gifting to pancreatic cancer research. It doesn't mean they don't care about the Medal of Honor. They don't care about West Point. They just are choosing to give in something else, and that's fine. So that's a long answer for what I've learned is it's about trust. The mission of your organization matters, of course, and being able to articulate that mission in a clear way matters, of course. But they have to trust you. They have to trust you. They have to trust that you're going to do right by the money and not waste it and have a good ratio of, the mission to the overhead costs and that sort of thing. So it's really, really hard. And yeah.
That's really helpful. It reminds me of the Jim Mattis quote, "Trust is the currency of the realm." Now our rapid fire questions. Favorite movies?
Favorite movie, Apollo 13.
So I was going to double click on that because our sons and I love space movies. Gattaca, The Martian, Interstellar, Gravity. The most recent space movie I saw was First Man. Any other movies besides Apollo 13?
Well, if it has to be strictly a movie, but let me say series, and that is the one on Apple TV where it's the NASA and Russia.
It's called
but
For
Russia's
All Mankind.
For All Mankind. Thank you. Loved it. That is absolutely amazing. I love it because it's based in facts, but then they have these weird twists that are not real history. That's a really good show. I love that one. And Ted Lasso, of course, but that's not space related.
This was the first question that we should have asked, a rapid fire question. Chris, UFOs?
No.
No UFOs. Okay.
No.
If you say so.
Brendan's giving me inspiration for this one. Flat Earth or not?
What did you say?
God.
Flat Earth or not
Oh,
flat Earth?
flat Earth. No.
That's a joke. Sorry.
Yeah.
Given you've
Going
seen
off the
the
deep
world
end
from
here.
outer space, I figured you of all people could give us an educated.
Yeah, I get
take.
asked that a lot, and I just roll my
God.
eyes. Yeah.
Favorite books?
It goes. I've read a lot that I like, but my favorite one that I read as a young kid that got me excited about reading was The Count of Monte Cristo. Is cool story of a guy. I don't know if you know the story, but
Alexander Dumas. It's about my short take of it is revenge, the dish best served cold.
yeah, yeah. I didn't like reading when I was a kid. I hated it because I was always reading books that I was told I had to read by the school, and that was the first book that I read on my own, and I couldn't put it down. And there's lots of books I've read later in life that I think are fantastic too, but that one sticks with me because it was the first one that I had like an aha moment of, wow, reading can be fun.
Favorite leaders, historic, present. It could be your high school coach or instructor. Favorite leaders.
Ernest Shackleton. I'm in awe that he was able to keep everybody alive and be stranded on the ice for whatever it was, 18 months or something. Only a unique leader could do that.
Favorite travel spots besides the International Space Station.
um, I haven't been there yet, but New Zealand is where I want to go. Favorite travel spot that I've been is the Caribbean. I just like hanging out, drinking a pina colada, and just chilling.
Roughly what year do you think we'll make it to Mars?
I think those astronauts are in elementary school right now. So what does that mean? Late 2030s, maybe? Oh, wait, it's already 2025. What am I talking about? So maybe even 2040
Wow,
with people. Yeah.
interesting. I doubt you eat any candy or eat anything unhealthy. I've
Oh,
seen
I
you in
do.
person. But what's your favorite candy if you have one?
My favorite candy is stuff with peanut butter in it. Reese's Pieces.
Those are, Your Honor, I have no further questions.
Spoken like a true American patriot.
Yeah.
Chris, thank you so much for joining us today, Chris. You've had an unbelievable life and continue to make a huge impact at the National Medal of Honor Museum. Where can folks find out more about your work and support the museum's work?
Our website, of course, mohmuseum.org. But we open in less than 100 days, March 25th, which is Medal of Honor Day in our country every year. March, so no coincidence, by no small coincidence, that's the day we're opening. And then a big community open to the public celebration on March 22nd, which is a Saturday night. And if anybody's in the DFW area that day, come on by. It'll be a wonderful evening.
That's wonderful. Chris, thank you so much for your service to our great country, and thank you for the work that you continue to do at the museum. Thank you so much.
Thanks to you guys for your service as well. Glad to be with you, and to all the military veterans, thanks for listening, and thanks for your service.
If you enjoyed the podcast today, you'll love our live events. Tickets are on sale now for the MilVet Startup Conference in San Francisco on February 5th and 6th. You can also check out all of our events at themilvet.org/events. We hope to see you in person, and we'll catch you back here next week.